Hi, my name is Rabbi Marc Katz. I'm the rabbi here at Temple near Tamid in Bloomfield, New Jersey. And this week's portion is called Parshat Shemini. Now, Shemini has a lot of moving elements to it, but the part that this year, as I read, has spoken to me was the part about how to keep kosher and what the animals are that you can and can't eat. Now, as a Reform rabbi, my path to keeping kosher has been one that's been mixed and has moved around a lot. And it's not something that's easily identifiable. When I was a student, I actually didn't necessarily keep kosher, in part because as I learned more about it, I read a random line in the Talmud that spoke about the importance of these laws keeping Jews and non-Jews away from eating together, because that might cause them to have friendships and eventually marry. And that felt antithetical to the spirit of the way that I practiced Judaism. But as I grew deeper into practice, I started kind of experimenting. I first gave up pork and shellfish and realized that that actually was incredibly meaningful to me. So the next year, I decided not to eat milk and meat together. And eventually, I got to a point where because I married someone who didn't eat non-kosher meat, only ate non-kosher meat, had a fully kosher kitchen, and ate vegetarian when I went out. Now, I say this not because I expect any of my congregants to have the same practice as me, but in order to show that one of the points of religious practice is to come to it with a real sense of gravity. And the more that I've studied and learned about the laws of keeping kosher, the more that I've realized that I'm not actually convinced by any logical argument for keeping kosher, which is exactly what the sages say. So there's a debate throughout Jewish time about whether or not keeping kosher falls into the realm of what's called a mishpat or a chok. Now, a mishpat are laws that make a lot of sense. The classical mishpat is honor your parents. You could write a whole book on why that's important. In fact, people have written books on why that's important. And the truth is, you could come to it even if you weren't Jewish. Almost every culture has some kind of value placed on caring about those who raised you. On the other hand, Judaism is full of what's called chukim, or laws that don't make sense. The classic example of that is not mixing wool and linen in the same garment. Now, one would think that that would be something that you could figure out, but at the end of the day, what a chok is it's a test of loyalty. It's a test of faith. You don't mix wool and linen not because it makes sense, but precisely because it doesn't. And in doing so, brings you closer to your tradition and to God. And by the way, in the weighting between the two, chukim are considered more important, in part because when you do something that does not make sense, when you suspend disbelief, when you try something on, just by the nature of it being tradition, it adds more weight. You couldn't accidentally stumble upon it. So this debate happens about whether or not keeping kosher is supposed to be healthier, whether it's supposed to make sense. And at the end of the day, from everything that I've read from the medieval sages who are engaged in this debate, I think keeping kosher itself is a chok. It's not meant to be something that makes perfect sense. Instead, it's a thing you do. And I know that this video series goes out to many in the Jewish world, whether Orthodox or Reform. But I want to speak especially to those liberal Jews out there now. I think everything that we do in our Jewish practice, at least as Reform, conservative, Reconstructionist Jews, we do in part because we want to be moved by it. We want it to make sense to us. We want to actively choose it. But part of the reason I keep kosher is not because I choose it, but because I want to take on at least a few things that just don't make sense to me, but that I do because it's tradition and I do because it's meaningful in the after effect. Our tradition has this teaching that when God gave the Torah, God said to the people, will you accept this? And the people said, we'll do it, and then we'll understand it. That's the classic chok. You do it, and then you come to get why it matters to you. And so whether it's keeping kosher or something else, I want to challenge all of us to take on a few stringencies, to take on a few chukim, and to suspend disbelief in certain realms so that you might discover pieces of your tradition that your head might get in the way of getting to.